So, because we acknowledge that all food, all good things, everything comes from God, now we come to the next bit where it says in verse 22 that some of that food that God has provided is to be returned to God. I'll read to the end of the chapter, and we'll make a few comments about their giving back to God. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. And when the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall eat of the tithe of your grain, of your wine, of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. And if the way is too long for you, so that you are not able to carry the tithe, when the Lord your God blesses you, because the place is too far from you, which the Lord your God chooses to set his name there, then you shall turn it into money, and bind up the money in your hand, and go to the place that the Lord your God chooses, and spend the money for whatever you desire, oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, whatever your appetite craves. And you shall eat it there before the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. And you shall not neglect the Levite who is within your towns, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. At the end of every 3 years you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in the same year, and lay it up within your towns. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, who are within your towns, shall come and eat and be filled, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands that you may do. All food, all blessing comes from God. And here he gives instructions. Moses gives instructions to the people about what they're to do in gratitude and thankfulness for what God has provided for them. He says that a tithe is to be brought to, and that phrase is used a couple times, that place where he will choose to make his name dwell. Remember, they haven't gone into the promised land yet. They don't know the geography. They're talking about Jerusalem, where the tabernacle and ultimately the temple is going to be constructed. But they're not there yet, so they don't know the name. So they call it the place where he will make his name dwell. So he says, once a year, you're going to take some of the stuff, a tithe, which comes from the root word 10, so likely 10% of what God has given you, and you're to walk it to the temple, and you're to give it to God. And it says that you may learn to fear the Lord. In 23b, the second half of 23, it says, the purpose of this giving is so that you might learn to fear the Lord. I like how the Living Bible says it. The purpose of tithing is to teach you always to put God first in your life. And so he says it this way, yearly, do this. Go down to the temple and give. The next bit from, I guess, verse 24 down to verse 26, he talks about those people who will inevitably live far away from the temple. He says, let's say you are an almond farmer, and you grow all these almonds, and you have, acres and acres and acres of almonds, and you have your 10% of almonds. And it's a lot of almonds. You've got to carry it a lot of miles. He says, well, this is what you could do. You can take those almonds, sell those, take the money, and then you can take that money down to Jerusalem, and then buy almonds there, or he says, whatever you want. He gives a list. Just buy something and give it to the Lord. And that main point that I want to come back to is in verse 23, as the Living Bible says, the purpose of tithing is to teach you always to put God first in your lives. By doing this yearly and building it into their calendar and making it something not that just happens, but that Moses tells them ahead of time to plan on doing, well, it's to remind them, I guess, 3 things. To acknowledge that, as I mentioned before, that everything comes from God. That they were a nation that was about a generation ago, they were all slaves. They had nothing. For the past 40 years, they were wandering in the desert. But now, for Moses, literally right now, the time has come when you're going to go into that land and you're going to have land. And you can grow things, you can have crops, you can have cattle, you can produce almonds or dates or grain. You can grow these things, and it is from the Lord. So yearly, you give him back just a bit to remind you that it all has come from him. And I guess the second thing would say, not only does it come from him, as in like it originates from him, but that it still is his. And that we, with all the things that we have, we are stewards of what God has given us to look after. And giving a tiny bit back to him and to his work reminds us that it is his. And we guard it. We look after what he has entrusted it. And it really reminds us, and for them particularly, who year by year would live on their crops, it reminds them that their security doesn't come from their crops. Their security doesn't come from the animals that they raise, but their security comes from God giving them another year. And that's really, I think, what's perhaps the most important thing about this offering, saying that they trust that God's going to look after them. So just, I guess, some with everything that we've seen so far in Deuteronomy 14, there's something similar but distinct for us. Something kind of the same but distinctly different for us. And we talk about how they were to give. And I think there's some things for us that apply. I sort of hinted at a couple of these things on Sunday morning. You might get a little refresher course. But they gave yearly. It was a regularly planned and a planned and regular event that they would do their giving. At a certain time, they would do it. Once a year, they would give. And likewise, I think for us, it would be a good thing for those of us that are decided to give. Our giving would be regular. In 1 Corinthians 16, there's like this paragraph that has to do with giving. It's Paul writes to the Corinthian church and instructs them about their giving. He says that on the first day of the week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up, as he may prosper. I believe that it is a good thing for us to plan on giving. So it's part of our schedule and the rhythm of our life, even that it's part of our budget. I don't, and even for those of you that were here on Sunday, I wanted to emphasize the fact that we should not give impulsively based on a sermon about it. That you hear it and you're like, oh, that's right, I should. Okay, and then we do it as a result of, I just heard a message that reminded me about it, so I guess I will. I believe it should be something that's planned and thought about. Nor should it be something based on performance. Come to church and there's a sermon that was maybe not about money, but it was good and you liked it. So as a reward, you put some money in the box, as if it's like busking. Oh, that's good, so I'm going to do it. Or likewise, on the other side, if you decide you're going to give beforehand, I'm going to give, and the sermon's not very good, you withhold it, as if it's X Factor or something, and you're like, no, I'm not going to do it because the performance wasn't very good. It's not a performance, it's not busking, but it's something that we as Christians, we're called towards generosity, we're called towards giving, and I believe it should be something that's planned. And it's not based on if we play your favorite song, or there's enough jokes, or if the sermon just really hits the spot or something. I believe it should be planned ahead of time. It should also, I believe, first point was that it should be planned and regular. Second point is that it should be proportional. I already read 1 Corinthians 16:2. He says, on the first day of every week, each of you is to put aside something and store it up, as he may prosper. Maybe you're aware, maybe you're not aware, there's an ongoing discussion for the past 2,000 years in Christianity that has to do with what are the parallels between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. People are interested in this, I guess, hypothetically, theologically, but where people really want to know is when it comes down to this tithe. Because the Old Testament, it gives very specific percentages. And the New Testament, it doesn't. It talks about giving, it talks about being generous, it talks about these types of principles, setting aside money, but the word tithe is not used. are never instructed or commanded in the New Testament. So people wonder, well, what do we do? And I'm not here to solve like an age-old theological discussion, but Paul talks about what looks like a proportion. He says, as you prosper. And then I believe that as someone gets on and does well, that should be a bigger set aside bit. Do you want to call that a percentage? I don't know. It seems like Paul's talking about a proportional gift. So it should be planned, it should be proportional, and joyfully. These guys, they come year in and year out, and they make this offering, and they benefit from it. The food is given, and some of it is burned up in sacrifice. Some of it is given to the priest, and then the rest of it, you see it there, they eat a meal together. They enjoy it. It's a community event. Their own family is there, but all the other pilgrims are there together, and there's just this joyful community event. And I've read kind of Jewish writings that talk about these things as being one of the highlights of the year, as they eat and they enjoy the presence of God together and the community being together. They enjoy it. On top of that, as we give, there are direct benefits for us. I gotta say, as for those of us that are part of this church and give to this church, the lights are on because of you. Thank you. The chairs are here because of you. The heaters are on because of you. There's a direct benefit between what we give and what we get. And there's an indirect benefit as well. The giving that we do enables workers and ministries and programs and projects to go ahead with mission into the city and to a degree around the world. It's a good thing to do. Giving should be joyful, and also it's worship. It is worshipful to declare, Lord, I do not live because of my money. I live because of you. And the hesitancy that I have about preaching about money twice in 1 week is, that it looks self-serving, that it looks like, one of those guys on TV that constantly talk about money. But I want you guys to pray. And so I preach about prayer. I want you guys to evangelize. So I talk about the gospel all the time. I want you guys to worship. So we try to just have brilliant musicians and good songs and put stuff up on the PowerPoint so we can sing along. And I want you guys to worship God through giving. So I preach about giving. These are just things that are good for us. It's good for us to hear these things. And I had to encourage myself this afternoon. Like, it's almost 7:30. And just thinking, no, Mike, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to encourage people to do what God says. It's like, okay, thanks.